Welcome to the Pain-Free Athlete Podcast. I'm your host, Dana Jones. I am a certified personal trainer, and I'm here to help you achieve your fitness goals without pain. In each episode, I'll share tips and strategies that will help you stay safe and pain-free while you're working out. I'll also interview experts in the field of fitness and pain management. So if you're ready to learn how to stay active and pain-free, then subscribe to the Pain-Free Athlete Podcast today. Welcome to the Pain-Free Athlete Podcast, and I'm your host, Dana Jones. I am super excited to have this very special guest today. Georgie Oldfield is a pioneering UK physiotherapist and founder of SIRPA, Stress Illness Recovery Practitioner Association. And after discovering Dr. Sarno's work in 2007, Georgie revolutionized her own approach to chronic pain treatment. And in 2010, she established SIRPA, creating the first training program in this field, which notably included personal trainers like myself. Georgie has made significant contributions to the mind-body approach in pain management, including publishing Chronic Pain, Your Key to Recovery, developing online recovery programs for individuals with chronic pain, delivering a TEDx talk in 2019, and appearing as a specialist on ITV's Tonight program. Today, I'm thrilled to have Georgie share her insights on the Pain-Free Athlete Podcast, discovering her innovative approach to chronic pain relief and recovery. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So I'm like I'm a toddler who's excited to have you, just because I've done your training program and I feel like I know you, but not everybody knows you. So I want to, if you could share your own, foray into the pain world, and how did you, obviously you're a physiotherapist, but how did you decide to kind of change the approach to how people experience chronic pain recovery?
Well, very briefly, it took a few years, but I started becoming interested in pain and treating people, helping people with pain while I was still working in the National Health Service. And I was getting a bit frustrated by how limited we were with being able to help people, especially people with chronic persistent pain. And generally people think, oh God, they call it heart sink patients. Because the belief is that there was nothing we could do to help except help them manage their pain. I also was working by then in the community, and so I started learning acupuncture. I learned a form of reflex therapy in spinal pain, but I was so limited in what I could take out to people's houses that I could then treat them with. But actually, as I started getting more into a form of reflex therapy in spinal pain and then other ways of helping with pain, I decided that I wanted to set up my own clinic because I had more scope, was able to do much more there. And what I found, without really recognizing it initially, was that people were getting better more than they were. So in other words, I was getting better results. And I think when I look back, it was basically, I gave people time. There were so many people that said, oh, it's been so wonderful that somebody's finally listening to us. And we know from the studies that actually empathy and longer sessions actually improves the outcome. So that definitely was helping. But then I was also questioning so many things like, why did I wake up with sciatica one day and have it for weeks? Why do other people wake up and blame it on their mattress or the pillow they've slept with for however many months or years? Why did people who had spinal degeneration and were due for surgery, I can remember a couple even on the list for surgery, then with my very gentle treatments, cancel it because they had no pain. Now, at the time, that was frying my brain because, my understanding as a physical therapist was that, that prolapsed disc, that slipped disc, was the cause of their sciatica or whatever. So that made me start to question what is going on here. And why people would often so quickly recover, sometimes even just because they burst into tears at the end of a session and then next week they came back and they were so much better. I'm going, what is going on here? And it just was, I suppose, a year or so of reading, already having reached that point, another year of reading, researching, just trying to find answers. And then just quite by chance coming across Dr. Sarno's book, one of his first books. And then it was more, I think it helped being experiential in that as I was reading his book, I woke up one morning with severe neck pain. And I knew from what I read so far why I had neck pain. But I haven't reached the point of what do I do about it? So it was with recognizing that. And then when the actual cause, when the reason for it just dissipated, so did the pain within about an hour. And so that was like an epiphany for me. And I wasn't one of these people that could just think, oh, that's interesting and ignore it. For me, it was an epiphany. It was life changing personally, because I resolved a lot of recurring health problems that I had, various chronic pains, but also bowel issues, rashes, eczema, all sorts of things. And I just it made sense of so many things from the past as well. So I started, actually, to be honest, I've just remembered this. I used to buy boxes of 50 of Dr. Sarno's books that were sent from America, and
To
I'd
give them
buy
away?
50 of them, and I was selling them for what I paid for them. So I wasn't making any money whatsoever. But oh my goodness, it was so interesting watching the results, and then some of them just literally helping guide and advise them. And that's when I reached out to Dr. Sarno, because I knew I just couldn't carry on doing what I'd always done, when I knew there was an answer to this as well. And so that's when I reached out to Dr. Sarno back in 2007.
That's amazing. I remember hearing about him, and it's funny because as I look at my timeline, he's dotted my life in various points, and of course, when you're ready, you're ready. And, I remember seeing him on 2020, which is a
Yes.
news program in the US, and he was helping John Stossel, who I loved at the time, and, of course, I just have that vision of John, like, laying in his office with his feet up on the chair
I can
and
still
just
picture
talking
that.
and how he was just staying there because he couldn't move, and that's how he spent most of his day. And Sarno really was I liked him because he was kind of a no BS kinda guy. He
Definitely was.
like, very typical New York, which is just like,
Right.
"This is ridiculous, just go ahead forward." But I noticed for me, even after reading his book and getting the aha moments, there was sections that were missing. So I had this information and it made so much sense because I think at the time I had a hamstring injury that was I was ignoring the main thing, which was my migraines, but I had this hamstring injury that was in my right leg forever. And then one day it switched to my left leg. And I thought, well, and then I started
Hmm.
reflecting back and realized I didn't do anything to cause it to jump from one leg to the other. And then, of course, I read his book and it says that's what happens when you stop paying attention to one thing, it pops up somewhere else, right? We know that as the symptom imperative. But you made a connection. I've noticed in your training, you've made a connection between his work and us and the general public that aren't either mental health professionals or even doctors. Can you explain, like, after your work with him, like, how you were able to synthesize that into what is now SIRPA?
Well, initially, it was coming back from seeing Dr. Sarno and with his support, setting up a program for my patients. So working with my own patients. And I remember doing a retrospective pilot study and looking back over the previous 3 months, picking out those people who had only done Dr. Sarno's approach, which is what I was doing at that point, education and journaling predominantly, helping them make those connections.
Mm,
And I can't remember the results now because it was so long ago. It was like 2008, but significant improvement with chronic pain. I think that's the difference, is that, very few people at that point were really doing anything more than just helping people manage and live with their pain. This was pain resolution, and this was a significant percentage. And in the meantime, I returned to the States on 3 occasions. So Dr. Howard Schubiner set up the first meeting back in 2009. And I was lucky enough to be invited over to stay with him and his wife and to attend the conference. And there were only, I think, about 35 of us then. But that was the start of it. Dr. Sarno was still working at the time, but part time.
mhm.
He was getting on in age at that point. And we wanted to look at how can we build on this foundation of Dr. Sarno's work and how can we really start raising awareness, because Dr. Sarno was very isolated in his own work and ostracized by so many of his colleagues. And thankfully, over the years, there's been more and more evidence and everything evolving, both from our field and the pain science field, the trauma science field. Excuse me a moment. And so I returned for the other uh, conferences that were held also at 2010, 2012. But in the meantime, I was thinking, I'm very isolated over here in the UK. when I'd gone out to see Dr. Sarno, before I went out, I researched to see if I could find anybody over here, this side of the Atlantic, who knew about his work. And I couldn't find anybody, hence going over to see him. And then I thought, well, actually, to raise awareness of his work, it would be easier, rather than just see my own clients and then tell people, to actually start training other health professionals. The other benefits were, it meant I got more peer support in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
It meant that people didn't have to spend the money and time, etc., that I did to try and get to that point of being able to work effectively with patients. And it meant that we could, refer between each other as well. And so really that time was really a time where I started I read every single book. There's loads more now, but every single book. I had attended all the conferences. I talked to Dr. Schubiner, Dave Clark, and we really linked with them all. And in the end, I just felt that a calling. I just knew I needed to do this. I couldn't just carry on with what I was doing. And so I decided to set up SIRPA. And it was sort of around in 2010 we set it up. But we also had a conference then. And I remember talking to them all there and just saying, I'm ready to move. I want to move forward. But are we going to come up with a term that we can all use? But what is now the ATNS and was the PPDA, they weren't ready because they were all over the United States. So a lot harder to all get together to sort of move forward. I had a couple of people here helping me at that point, and I was ready to go. And I'd spent quite some time, those 3 years between that 2007 and 2010, really looking into how can I help this evolve and reach more people, help more people, and learn as much as I can. So by 2010, I was ready to start training. And initially it was physical courses. So going around and around the country, we did one in Spain as well, but going around the country doing physical courses before we moved the training online in 2018.
That's fantastic. Well, and I know I found you, I believe, probably late 2020, early 2021. Because I read the book in 2020, and pretty much as soon as lockdown hit, I
Yeah.
thought, well, because I'm a teacher and so I was sitting at home, well, what am I going to do? And I
So
can't
you were one of the
remember.
ones that wasn't working, whereas all my work was online, so I was working really hard.
Yeah. I mean, my fitness business blew up because people were home. So they're like, let's have classes every day. So I was having classes every night.
All right.
But I was still having a little, pain. And I don't remember. I think it was one of those, I had heard about the book because one night I was on some horrible Facebook page that was telling people how the proper terms to say to get on disability for chronic migraines. And one woman said, well, I don't have that problem anymore because of the fact that I read this book. And I was like, what book is that? And then I was debating, and I had bought the book, and
Which book are you talking about?
the Mind Body
The
Prescription.
Mind Body Prescription, right.
And she said, she's never had a migraine since. And, and I was like, oh, well, that's kind of cool that you could just get, now I know better about book cures. So I bought the book, and then of course I found no time to read it because that's what avoidance is. So then 2020 hits. I'm sitting here going, well, there's only so much on the internet, and I don't want to spiral into this craziness that, who's wearing masks and shots and all kinds of craziness. And so I read the book, and I remember feeling so awkward because I read the part about the pain, and then I got all this information. And of course I finished the book. And so, I stood up and was like, yay, I should be healed. And then that didn't work out so much because I realized there was more work to be done. And then that's when I found Dr. Schubiner and started doing his journaling. And then that led me to Nicole Sachs. And, it's like these little puzzle pieces all fall in. And as a perpetual teacher, I just see education everywhere. And I thought, I need to try this out. So I tried it out on a couple of clients, and I was getting really good results. And I thought, I have to, in my brain, I feel like it's important for me to be educated to the nth degree before I can share this information with you. And so I was looking around, and I could not find anything for fitness coaches or even you had to be a doctor. You had to be a doctor or you had to be a social worker or some kind of mental health professional to do any of the stuff. And I'm on the West Coast of the States. So I'm in California and there's stuff in LA. There's all the stuff, but it's not for people like me. And I remembered being frustrated, and then something happened, some Google search came up and SIRPA came up. And I emailed you because I wanted to know, is this for me? Am I misreading this? Is it okay? Can I do this? And you were, of course you can do this. And so, yeah, you're the reason why we're here, or why I'm here right now in this space. But it was just so wonderful to have something for me. And then because your course is so well built, to have the videos, to have the reading, to have the outside information, and it just all started to kind of congeal for me. And it was just wonderful that you did this, because I don't know if I'd be here right now, or I'd be as far as I am in my recovery
Yeah.
with the information that I learned from your trainings.
I think the important thing to note here is that initially, when we started doing the training, there were so many people, personal trainers, yoga teachers, Pilates teachers, who were really keen to do this work. And then we started talking. We initially didn't allow them because, we were working with the American team as well, and said, oh, no, we must not train them. And then we did start opening it up. And then we were getting feedback from people saying, we're finding it really challenging when we get on to actually working with clients. So we then looked at restricting it. This is why when we evolved with the new training, we have SIRPA informed, and then we have SIRPA practitioner, because that means that people like you, personal trainers and yoga teachers and Pilates teachers, and people who are seeing the public all the time, and who so often do have, as we know, so many people do have stress-induced symptoms. And so therefore, to be able to understand the physiology behind that, to actually understand what's going on, and to be able to advise and educate and signpost. I mean, how wonderful for a client who comes to see you, who starts learning about this to prevent them going into the chronic to a chronic condition. Or if they've got a chronic condition, they may well be one who all they need is a bit of education and understanding and signposting. And that's it. That could resolve their situation. The SIRPA practitioner, that's the area the SIRPA practitioner training that's where we allow doctors, physios, osteopaths, counsellors and psychotherapists. But I think the SIRPA informed level is just as important, because they can get in there in that first level to see people.
Well, and I love it because it gives me the opportunity to refer.
Yeah.
Previously, my only referrals were to chiropractors, acupuncture, whatever I was seeing that was very hands-on, very left-brainy kind of stuff, although acupuncture may ride that middle line. But my first client that I did this work with had a torn labrum in her hip, and was having excruciating pain, was unable to sleep through the night, was not wanting to take drugs, and had to sometimes, just because the pain was so excruciating.
Yeah.
And she had actually come into my classroom and as a guest speaker, and was sitting on a donut. I was like, what is happening? And she said, well, she was dancing with a friend and heard a pop, and got an MRI and found out that it was torn, and the doctors were ignoring her. And they said, well, you're not an athlete, so we really don't need to work on this. And you really shouldn't be experiencing this, and really blew her off. So there was a lot of emotion on top of the actual physical injury. But this had gone on for 6 months, 8 months, that she was in this excruciating pain as if it happened yesterday. And so we started working together, and I just kind of played around with what information I had. And I now have this mat. It's a Pilates mat that's a little extra thick. That's my crying mat, because it seems like the people who are the most sensitive and who benefit the most from this work get on that mat, and inevitably they'll break down and start crying. And so now I have like
And
tissue
that's
box.
okay.
It is okay. And again, it's that case of when that release happens, they're feeling so much better.
Yes.
And so today she runs on a treadmill, is out doing all the things, and has still had the torn labrum, and there was no surgical repair or anything like that. And she's able to sleep through the night, all that stuff. And it's just, I think probably the most valuable thing, and you said this earlier, was the time.
Mm.
was giving her
Mm.
time to feel heard, to be able to talk about the frustration of dealing with the medical community, and also just the ability to have a safe space to confess her frustrations
Yeah.
without judgment.
Yes.
And that seems to be a very large part of this work.
Yeah. And with your help, so helping to understand the context around the injury or when the pain came on. There's so many factors, aren't there, that are involved in why pain comes on in the first place or why it becomes chronic. And so once they understand that and can start seeing their own patterns, then they can, then often the fear starts settling down. And that's the aim, isn't it? Let's get over these fears and the doubts around it.
Yes. And there's a resistance too as well. Like I've noticed, and I guess I'm professing today. So yesterday I had a flare up and I spent the day kind of spiraling because of, and I'm sure I was like a little nervous about this. I'm also on the agenda for jury duties, and we started work after having the week off. So there's a lot of stressors that I was, acting like they're not happening. And so of course I had a flare, and so I took a moment and realized what I was doing, and it felt like familiar and kind of gross, I guess is the easy way to say it. It's like, oh, I remember this. This is like the weird thing you do when you have the migraine and then you start like taking things and trying to figure out like, what can I do to get to the next thing? And so I decided to cancel everything that I had yesterday, and I laid there for a moment, and then something happened and all of a sudden the pain just went away. Like cuz I gave up. I gave up the fight.
Yes.
And I realized it, yesterday evening where I was sitting there, it's like, "Oh, like, that's what happens when you actually give up the fight." But
Yeah.
there's still this underlying anxiousness that still comes up. And I wanted to ask you about that. And I know that it's not necessarily your wheelhouse, but why does that happen where when the chronic pain starts to be dealt with, why is that anxiousness still there? Like, why do we get stuck in that chronic fight or flight?
I don't think there's any evidence to show why, but I see it an awful lot that
Hmm.
when there's so much focus on the symptom that the pain takes over, and that's doing a good enough job, thank you very much, for hiding the unresolved emotions that might be underneath. So we don't need anything else. But actually, we start to understand, like, for example, Dr. Sarno would say ulcers, stomach ulcers were a big thing in his day,
Hmm.
whereas you just don't see them these days. And it's almost
Yes.
like back pain then became that because people understood that ulcers were stress induced. So, I'm not a stress head, so they're not going to get ulcers, they'll get something else. Back pain now is becoming known to be stress induced. So, there's probably going to be lots of there are other symptoms as well, like, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, pain being blamed on hypermobility, all these other
Hmm.
things. Um, so when our focus has been on a particular symptom and we understand that and we're getting over the fears and that settles down, then it's like something else is needed to stop us going even deeper and really recognizing what it is deep down. We might have got over the superficial fears and doubts and things like that, but I would suggest surfacing anxiety is another kickback from the body going, oh, no, don't go there, don't go there. That's dangerous. And it's about, I think this is why I love the way that our work has evolved so much over the last few years, is that we so recognize the importance of getting out of our head and into our bodies and becoming so much more emotionally aware, building our felt sense. Yes, there'll be anxiety, but anxiety is then the thoughts and following our
Hmm.
thoughts and going round and round and round and fear, and then you focus on one thing. Then, if it's not over analyzing all these things that then fuel symptoms, and the anxiety is created by unresolved emotions, as pain is, but then unfortunately, all these looping thoughts then make the anxiety worse. So, the more somebody can learn to actually get out of their head into their body, develop their felt sense, build their emotional awareness so that they can start calming things down and really building the neural circuits related to feeling safe rather than feeling anxious, because at the moment it's just learn it. The more we practice, the more we do anxiety, the more anxious we are, the more we're practicing anxiety and the neural pathways, neural circuits related to anxiety. Whereas if we can then have moments of self-soothing, of calm, of remembering happy times, that's not the answer, but it helps just start moving, learning to move across from the anxiety into the body, as well as exploring what are the deeper things going on that's actually maybe my primal brain's thinking, no, don't go there. Maybe allow it to, maybe through journaling, through asking questions and seeing what the body says. So yeah, I think it's just another symptom, like symptom imperative, and it's very common to go from pain to then anxiety because your focus has moved off the pain then.
Yeah, it's that self-compassion,
Mm.
that understanding is something that I don't know how many people, I feel like there's a timeline of where people are in various parts of recovery. And I know for me that having compassion for myself wasn't there. And as you're talking, I think, part of me wants to say, I don't remember, my grandmother having these issues. And then, of course, that's just total BS because, of course, she had these issues. And my mother had the same issue because she had an ulcer, right? Because during that 70s and 80s time, that was the thing to have was to
Mm.
have an ulcer. And that's when, Tagamet and all these other drugs came out as a result of it. But that going back to, and my mother was not very self-compassionate, God bless her, but she just really, she felt that surge to continually move forward. And so what are, aside from journaling and, do you have any specific ways that you recommend for clients in terms of really moving toward that healing process, and how do you integrate these techniques into your daily life?
I think, first of all, there's no one size fits all.
Mhm.
So it's working with a client and understanding what might be helpful for them. But what I would always start with is education, really helping them understand, and then specifically to their situation, what evidence do we have that would really help demonstrate to them that, for example, spinal degeneration, all the studies showing that this is a normal abnormality as you get older. So I think the education side is really important to understand what their beliefs are and their fears are in relation to their condition. What have they been told as well? So, if you've been told, oh, your spine's crumbling, or, you're going to end up in a wheelchair, things like that, the people are told. Ideally, being able to explore those and help people rationalize those and any fears and doubts related to, a neuroplastic or mind-body diagnosis that they've been given, and away from the fears of what they've been told their condition is due to. So I think that's where I would start. I would also consider looking at a somatic approach. So we know there's a lot of trauma science these days as much as there is the evolving pain science. And so helping them, I feel our approach is really about teaching them to become self-empowered. So like you said, self-compassionate, learning what they can do themselves to become empowered and to gain agency over being able to do what they want in their life and to be able to have agency over their body as well. Definitely emotional awareness and expression comes in. Now, obviously, Lumley and Howard Schubiner developed the EAET. We use emotional awareness and expression, not necessarily in that specific format, but definitely it's important to teach individuals to learn how to become emotionally aware, how to express, whether that's through journaling or other ways. It might well be through doing it somatically. Certainly one of the first things I do is teach people breath work and to be able to feel their emotions, to develop their felt sense, because we know that, for example, alexithymia is an inability to be able to feel and label emotions. And it's very prevalent in people with chronic pain and other chronic conditions. But one of the first things I would do is actually get them to go through an exercise to determine, do they have any felt sense? Are they aware of anything? For example, if they bring to mind somebody they love, are they aware of any shift in the body? If they bring to mind doing an activity that causes pain, are they aware then? It just gives us more of a clue. And if they're constantly in their head as well, then that's even more important. And I come across loads of people who will say, I've read every book, I've done every online program, I've done this, I've done that, I've journaled till the cows come home, and I'm still not better. Should I do your program? And usually by then I'll say, I wouldn't suggest so, no.
Save your
They
money.
know it, they understand it. But what I would suggest is they're not experientially working through it. So for that, somebody coming to me who said all that, I would say this is more about, this is not an academic understand. Yes, you've got an academic understanding, but this is not an academic process. This is about, okay, you understand it. Now get out of your head and all the beliefs and fears and doubts and thoughts and looping thoughts and things, and help them learn to be still, to sit in nature, to be mindful, to meditate, to do breath work, to do some somatic work. When they start doing that, and especially, for example, if we're in a session and you say, provocative testing, you would ask them to imagine themselves doing an activity that normally hurts, and it hurts them and they're just sitting there, that can be a really good reinforcement that this is a mind-body condition.
Mm-hmm.
And then, or alternatively, if they come in and they're struggling to sit and they're in agony or they've got a headache, then again, I would start with the breath work. I would encourage them to get their attention out of their head and their thoughts and focus on their heart and being self-compassionate, loving kindness, and taking their attention down towards the heart and slowing their breathing down and doing some somatic work. And what can happen then is the pain comes down. So it's giving them experiential understanding of how this can start to help. So I think there's lots of different things that can help, and it depends on the individual about how they're presenting what's going on. We use journaling, we use imagery, as you say, self-compassion, meditation, and so that we've got something that might help all. Pain reprocessing therapy, fabulous. There's some people need more than using that. So we use the elements of that within SIRPA's training. Even the book, Alan's book, is fantastic. I think what's been lovely about this work over the last decade and more is seeing, since our first meeting in 2009, how people have evolved. Alan's gone on and done pain reprocessing therapy. Howard and Mark Lumley have gone on to do EAET. And everybody's gone on to do different things, but everything pulls together. It might be somebody's working clinically with their patients, and their patients tell other people. People have written books, people have run programs, training organizations. SIRPA's might have been the first one, but boy, there are a lot more courses now for for health professionals and health wellness professionals to do. So and podcasts, this is all a way of sharing it. And that's why it's becoming so much more well known now, and we are heading to a tipping point. It might take a while to get there, but we're getting there because of the effort by so many people, not just the health professionals, but the public and people who've recovered, who were just passionate. Curable was developed by 3 people who resolved their back pain, and look how well they've done, and they're an integral part of our community worldwide.
I love the aspect of having tools, because like you said, everybody doesn't get better. And I referred to it earlier. There are book cure people. There are people that, I just finished Dan Buglio's book, and listening to people say, I've watched his YouTube channel every day for a year, and now I, no longer can, I can go out and do things and whatever it may be because of the fact that I listened to him. And it seems like everybody has almost like a niche provider.
Yes, and some
They're,
people move around.
yes.
And I'm sure there are people that would go to Dan and say, oh, I worked with a SIRPA practitioner, that didn't work. There have been people who've come and say, oh, I've done Dan's work, it doesn't work. There'll be people, I saw so-and-so, it hasn't worked. It does, it's not the individual, it's not the way it's taught, it's more sometimes, and I know I used to find this quite frustrating when somebody, a client would come in and we've been working and they're doing really well, and then they had a massive aha moment. And they said, I read in whoever book it was, it didn't really matter whoever had written it, but I'd read in this book and he made such sense. And I just thought, I've been saying that every week, but it's the timing has to be right.
Mm-hmm.
The way it's said, they have to be ready for it. And, that happens so often. And that's why people will pick up one of our books and throw it across the room. I know people have done that before. I had a patient who came to me who said, my friend gave me your book. Can I come and see you? And she said, you gave it to her a couple of years ago, but she said, it's not for me. And it never was. She never was ready for that. But it
Right.
changed the life of the friend that she gave it to. And I think
Yes.
we need to respect that we need to have the right relationship. So again, that's why we offer discovery calls. Our practitioners offer free discovery calls, because there is no point you working with somebody that you don't relate to, or you don't trust, or you're on edge. I wouldn't carry on with working with somebody if I didn't fully trust them to be able to offload and talk about whatever I wanted to. So the individual is important as well as the approach. In fact, that's what they say with psychotherapy, isn't it? That
Mm-hmm.
the psychotherapeutic relationship, that's so important, that relationship rather than what we do.
That's also difficult for a lot of people. I know I felt like I chose my doctor. I had to stick with my doctor and everything that he said. And even though I didn't agree with it, I felt like I didn't have a choice. And if that's one thing I have learned is that I have choices and I can fire my doctor.
Yes.
And I feel empowered where before I think I felt like a victim
Yeah.
of my situation. And now
Mm.
all of a sudden through all of this work, now I can say, oh no, I don't like what you're saying. It's not really aligning. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. And I'm finding it's leaking into other parts of my world too, because before pain was an excuse not to do certain things. And now I can say to you, no, thank you. I don't want to do that, instead of saying, oh, yes, maybe. And then,
Yes.
oh, I have a migraine. I can't go.
And your experience yesterday was an opportunity, because you
Yes.
learned from that, didn't you?
Yes. And it was totally unexpected. And it was wonderful. It is still sore, but it's just going like I almost burst into tears last night because I was like, this is what a lack of resistance looks like.
Yeah. Yeah.
What a wonderful thing to just be here and be in my body and not try to
Absolutely.
fight stuff.
And for people
So,
to recognize that we're all humans, that we all
yes.
have mind and body and emotions. And I don't reckon there's any one of us who goes through life, even once we have all this understanding, without a symptom every now and again. Or, everybody has sensations, but maybe they do end up with a symptom. And actually, it's the main thing is about understanding it and not going into the fear. And even if you do go into the fear initially, then actually catching yourself and going, hey, hang on, what's all this about? What's going on in my life? Etc. And working
Mhm.
through that. And then that reinforces that to you. So you're less likely to get that in the future. And if you do, it's another reinforcing it, keeps building those neural circuits rather than the neural circuits involved in the actual pain. They can become more dormant for longer.
Yes, so true. So, all right. What are you most proud of?
That's no, you could have warned me about that one. What am I most proud of? I don't like the word proud. I find that really hard.
What's a better word for you? I guess, what do you feel most accomplished in?
My biggest achievement, maybe. Suppose, yeah, developing SIRPA. It's not been the easiest of things, not in any way. Uh, so I suppose, yes, the fact that I have continued, um, despite the challenges that I faced
Mhm.
all the way through, basically, and that we have such an incredible group of practitioners now, people who've done the trainings, have informed their practitioners. I think that's my biggest achievement, I feel, is that to have given people the opportunity to learn and to then become such wonderful practitioners in this field, and that then helps in our work to build this, raise awareness about this work and make a change.
I love it. What's next for you?
Well, we're taking on a new advisory board actually with SIRPA. So we're going to then actually get together. We're waiting for our first meeting to then start looking at the future of SIRPA. And that would be telling if I told you. But we're looking at there's opportunities that are coming our way. And we also need to talk about, succession of SIRPA
Mhm.
as well. Nothing continues forever.
This is true.
Yeah, lots to work on,
Well,
definitely.
I love that because I know I've talked to a lot of UK practitioners and they're starting to feel more comfortable in their practice but there's definitely, excuse me, there's definitely that piece where it needs to go a little bit more east
Mm-hmm.
is the feeling, because I've talked to a couple of people in Germany and they're like, yeah, we're not quite getting it yet.
Mm.
So,
Yeah, absolutely.
the spread is a little slow from what I'm understanding going toward the east.
I think that often why that is we need to have the change makers. We
Mm-hmm.
need to have people who are going to push against the norm and make a difference. I remember when I set up SIRPA and started training people, and in my head, everybody was going to do what I was doing, completely change and, get it out there. And actually, everybody's different. And there'll be
Mm-hmm.
people who want to just sit in their office and do their, in their clinic and see their clients. There might be people who want to write a book or do a video or a podcast. Everybody's different, and all of this works together. But it's where it's building up in countries like Spain, like the Netherlands, is because there is somebody there who's had an epiphany like I did, who is fighting to make sure that there is a difference. And, for example, Encana, who has really been working hard in Spain, she came over to the UK probably 2012, 13 to do the training. And she's been working so hard for many years to really build it over there in Spain. And so I think it is a matter of finding hopefully more than one person, a team of people who are going to work together to push the change. But in the end, down the line, they've got in Israel as well. Israel, there's a big group of them really working on this in Israel. And I think in the long run, things will change. There's no doubt about it. But some countries might be a bit slower to pick it up than others, depending on
Yeah.
who hears
Well, I
about
love
it
it.
and who's going to do it.
I love that people are spreading out, and we're seeing some stuff in what is it, the UAE, right? There's different practitioners that are kind of popping out, and it's good. I mean, that's why I started this podcast, was because I felt so strongly about the work, and especially as an athlete, I see the need for this work, because a lot of us are stress balls.
Yeah.
And there is that belief, especially as an athlete, of not feeling and not being emotionally involved, right? There's all this training that's supposed
Mm.
to rule out the emotions, because you need to stick to whatever your job is. If it's throwing a ball or kicking a ball or doing whatever, and you shouldn't be
Yeah. And
emotional.
focusing on getting better and the
Yes,
timings and
and
keeping an eye on
practice,
your
right? There
watch.
is no emotional practice. There is no breath work. There's only, drilling in your skill. And we need to understand that. And I think a lot of athletes don't. But the trend is starting to change. And of course, it's because a lot of us are getting older and we're noticing that things keep popping up. And then we start seeing, obviously, the correlation of, wow, this only pops up right before this race or whatever may be happening. So
I know, I think it was the 2012 Olympics, and they'd had a psychotherapist working with the British cycling team,
hmm.
and they won so many gold medals. And it was because finally somebody was actually really working with them, not just your typical sports psychotherapist, but somebody who was really helping them work on the emotional side as well. And they did incredibly well.
Yeah. Well, and as an athlete, you really just think a lot of times people feel that if they feel emotions, they lose who they are.
Yeah.
And that's the exact opposite, right? Is that you, by sharing who you are and being emotionally invested, is actually what makes you a better athlete. And it's just learning how to channel those emotions in a more productive way, or at least have a better understanding, instead of saying, well, there's a twinge in my stomach, I'm going to die, saying, I'm just excited for whatever I'm
Yeah.
doing today.
Yeah. And there's so many pressures on athletes, whether that's professionals or amateurs.
Mm-hmm.
And, you hear about all these people who are training to do marathons and half marathons or whatever, and about how leading up to it, they suddenly get back pain or knee
Mm-hmm.
pain or whatever. And in fact, I did a half marathon a number of years ago now, but I remember coming back on the bus at the end and hearing people saying, oh, mile 8, my back went or my knee went. And I'm just thinking, yep, that makes sense. Certainly an old dormant neural circuit for me, and my knee from an initial skiing injury was triggered around mile 8, because that's when you're beginning to get a bit tired. But what
Yes.
I found fascinating was every time I ran past a band, no pain whatsoever. And
Mm-hmm.
whenever I started chatting to somebody on the way who maybe had was raising money for the same charity. It resolved. So really, I was playing with it as I was running, and it was just so interesting. And then to hear, but there's so much pressure if especially if you're raising money and everybody knows that you're doing it as well. You've got to succeed. There's so much pressure people put on themselves.
That's so funny because I ran a half marathon and it was about between 8 and 9 that I started having this excruciating knee pain. And of course, when you're out on a course by yourself or there's not too many people around, there's a lot of thought toward, holy moly, my knee hurts.
Yes.
And yeah, and then when I was done, miraculously, like,
Yeah.
I was kissed by God and I was absolutely healed and it wasn't a problem again. But boy, during that period of time, whatever it took, because it took a long time for
Yeah.
me to run those miles, I was definitely dying, and then thinking things were happening and all that stuff. But
Fascinating.
anyway, Georgie, thank you so much for today. It was
You're welcome. Thank
lovely
you.
to have a chat with you in person, in person as we can be through the waves of the
Yeah.
internet, and to learn so much more about SIRPA. Is there anything like how could people get in touch with you? And I mean, aside from the obvious ways, I guess.
Well, probably just through the website, www.sirpa.org.
And she's very responsive, just so you know. And she has really good people around her that are very responsive. So I love that. So if you're somebody who wants to do the work, I encourage you to do the work. It changed who I am as a trainer. Clearly, it's changed Georgie's trajectory in life. She's the goddess of pain reprocessing, all that stuff in the UK. I love it. You've touched so many people's lives, and the people that I've interviewed that have been SIRPA trained are it's so different. Everybody is so different, and they all come back to you and the work that
We're
you've
all
done in this
excited.
space. Yes, they're all excited about the space that you have provided, and we really appreciate it.
Lovely. Oh, thank you very much. I love it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for inviting me.